Thank you for Maximum PC here at GDC 2016. I'm here at Survios' booth speaking with James. And James, I just got to chance to play Raw Data, which is a VR title that you guys are working on. Can you go into a little bit more detail about what it's about?
Yeah, so Raw Data is essentially an action combat sci-fi experience, and it's a VR game. You can play co-op with your friends. In this showcase demo, we've allowed you to essentially be inside of a sort of a manufacturing plant environment where robots are coming out of pods from every angle. There's a lot of different enemy types like ninja robots with katanas and shooting robots with lasers, and you're essentially in the center of the room, and your whole mission is to download as much raw data as possible and to survive as long as possible in order to essentially expose the nefarious practices of this evil corporation called Eden Corp. So essentially it's like Eden's like this evil Apple computer, and you're like a hacker-resistant sort of like anonymous style hacker group, and you infiltrate into Eden and try to steal all of their data and get out alive. So you have a bunch of different weapon sets. You have a pump-action shotgun where you actually have to physically reach out and grab and pump with the other hand, so it feels like actual pump-action shotgun does in real life. Everything you aim just down the sights like you can in real life, or you could shoot from the hip if you want to. There's a few other weapons like a compound bow, so you can reach back behind your back, string up a bow, and then you let it go and you let it fly. And there's things like explosive arrows and a few different additional ability upgrades for that. In addition, there's handguns, so you can pull a handgun off your hip. You can actually grab a clip and reload manually, or you can do like a proximity reload, like Time Crisis style. And you pretty much play exactly how you want to play and be the badass that you've always wanted to be. So it's very much this. It delivers that vision and that dream of being an action hero.
You didn't mention the sword.
Oh yeah, the katana, of course. So you can pull a katana off your back, it deploys, it's like an energy blade, and you can hack and slash robots, and there's a bunch of different interesting abilities like bullet time and going in slow motion. So you can actually, trigger bullet time and cut a bunch of robots in half really quickly, just like a ninja. And we're also expanding that feature set as well, like being able to throw it and hack a bunch of enemies and use telekinesis to pull your weapons back to you or pick up enemies and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of different interesting classes that start panning out of this, where we can actually build out a full title that incorporates a lot of first-person shooting, action, combat, and tower defense.
I think my favorite weapon was the bow. It felt really natural, as someone who's actually used the bow before.
Yeah.
So this game is, if you guys are targeting it for a Vive release, right? Is it going to be on other platforms as well?
Right now we're not announcing anything around other platform support, but it's definitely a high priority for us to get this content in the hands of as many people as possible.
Yeah.
So I would absolutely, in the future, I'd imagine we'll be gearing up for other launches.
Gotcha. How important is the room scale aspect of the game?
So room scale is like the highest level, like the most premium experience you can get. On the lowest level, you can have a sit-down experience with a gamepad, and a lot of games oscillate on the spectrum, and they're all super compelling and fun ways of playing content. It's just the difference is mostly about how engaged you are with your physical body, how immersed you are in the environment, and actually feeling like you're there. So for this experience, the ideal is being able to use room scale with a Vive setup, but it's also going to be functional, doing things like just a standing experience with case in point with the PlayStation VR or PlayStation Move controllers. You can stand there and face one direction and have an experience like that. Additionally, if you want to sit Indian style on the ground, you can do that. If you want to go prone with your gun, you can lay down on your belly if you want to. It's really like the whole formatting of how you choose to position yourself is kind of turned on its head now, because VR can track you in any way that you want. So if you want to sit on the couch, you can. If you want to lay down, you can. However you want to play, you can play.
Did you say that it also works with Xbox controller, or are you just saying that in general?
Oh, in general, I was just stating that a lot of early titles for VR will be integrating gamepad inputs, traditional inputs, with a motion-tracked VR headset.
Gotcha. So the demo that I played was, it took place in kind of a small play space, and I think you mentioned off camera that there will be opportunities to like teleport around or something like that. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, there's a lot of locomotion paradigms we've been working with over the years. One of the most compelling ones for this type of gameplay, especially for tower defense, is having multiple locations that you can beam in between, so that you can actually have multiple virtual play spaces, and you can actually defend different points on the map from enemies, and it's a much more dynamic, more strategic experience. So in this early demo, this is just a very early look at what level 1 is going to be like, where we just kind of establish the combat experience, fighting against enemies, and getting comfortable in your own body in VR and moving around and interacting with other players. The next step after that is integrating strategic elements, larger map traversal, defense turrets, and barricades and traps, and all these different traditional tower defense mechanics to start building into the gameplay loop so that users start to get more advanced over time.
I'd also like to mention that this was a co-op experience, and how important is co-op to the experience of the game?
You could play it single player. It's definitely more satisfying having a friend in VR, especially when you have an entire avatar that represents your body. So you can actually, you have your hands in front of you, but you can interact with another person with actual body language. And so there's a social experience here that goes way beyond just social media experiences like texting with your phone or on a computer. There's a lot of abstraction layers with traditional social media. This pretty much eliminates all that abstraction, and you essentially can have a face-to-face conversation and a social experience with another user just as real as you can in real life.
Yeah, I was playing with somebody who was, actually in another room. Granted, he was in the room next door, but it felt like he was in the same room with me.
Yeah, and you almost you have a social bubble almost, like where you'll start, you don't want to invade people's space, but they're not actually even there. So that's a good trick to know that it's fooling your brain in just the right way.
And it's interesting. I noticed that you guys are playing around with haptic feedback. So I bust out the samurai sword and I tried cutting into him, and I got a little bit of resistance on the controller, which was a really nice touch.
Yeah.
Was there a lot of work involved in getting that to work, or?
Well, there's haptic technologies built into the Vive controllers and many other VR peripherals as well. One of the tricks is a timely execution of that, and how much you feel it. That's sort of a generic way of putting it, but there's varying levels of haptic feedback you can provide, such as shooting a gun would be a strong feedback, or striking something with the sword. For example, pulling back on a bow and feeling the tension of the string start to tighten, you might have smaller clicks of haptics inside the actuators that give a sensation of tension on a string. So there's little nuanced details that really just comes down to playtesting in order to give the best feedback for the players.
Cool. Another question that I had was, in your game, you're rendering the whole entire body. It's not just a floating head with floating hands. You guys have the whole, like, shoulders, elbows, and things like that in there. Was that hard to get down? I think they're calling it inverse kinematics, right? Where you have to predict based on their hands and their head, like where their elbows and shoulders are. Yeah, so there's a myriad of technologies that go into that. IK is one of them, where you're predicting like elbow points based off of hands and these types of things. Mm-hmm. There's also things like, and this is all very much a work in progress, but including like foot pinning. So when you look down, your feet are in a plausible location based off of where you're moving in the space, and also blended animation for hands and interactions. So your motion tracked hand actually blends with a canned animation, such as say I grab a gun and that gun flips around my finger and it lands in my hand. That's my character's avatar doing this extra gun trick where it flips around my hand and I catch it. I didn't actually do that, but I feel more badass and I feel more awesome because that little thing happened for a split second. And that's blending a canned animation with actual motion tracking. Gotcha. Ultimately, at the end of the day, avatar embodiment we think is going to be very much a user preference. The game is perfectly playable, having just your hero hands visible and having your first-person perspective. You can always see the other players, their full body, or if you're spectating, you can see everybody who's in the game. You can see their bodies. But we're going to supply an option with the game to be able to turn your own body on and off depending on your preference. Do you think that you could? Do you think you could kind of simulate the footsteps? Like let's say you're playing with somebody else and they're walking around. Do you think you could simulate the movements of their feet?
Oh yeah, that's what I mean by when I refer to the foot pinning software.
I wasn't sure if you were referring to your own foot, or like the other person's.
Right. So there's no actual tracking happening on your feet, because the only tracking points are your hands and your head. But we can make estimates about where we expect your feet to be based on the canned animation formation cycle and where your head and torso are. And as long as we can pin the foot to the ground, so it looks like the feet are actually touching the ground, we can use inverse kinematics to simulate the knees and the rest of the body posturing as well.
You know, it's funny because I was playing, you know, like I said, I was playing co-op with somebody, and they were like in the center of the space, and I almost wanted to tell them, like, hey, can you move over a little bit?
Get out of the way, yeah,
Get out of the
trying
way.
to shoot here.
Even though I guess it really doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Can you see, like, so I feel like inverse kinematics is like, I think at this point with, you know, it being so early on in VR, I think everybody has to like create their own like skeletal system.
Right.
Do you see like an API being created that like can just be, you know, used across multiple games? I feel like that's something that could happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's
like,
certainly
you know,
good.
like the physics or whatever, or, you know, I forget what that physics thing was, and you see that in a bunch of different games.
Right.
Havoc, right?
Right.
So I could see something like that with inverse kinematics as well.
Yeah, I mean, full body IK certainly could be a middleware. There's a lot of different use cases for it, and there's a lot of different needs depending on the character types and the type of game. There could be a generic plugin that could work with multiple engines, I'd imagine, in the future. But again, it's a very challenging engineering problem to solve, and a lot of times you can get very, very close to getting near perfect, but it's hard to get all the way to 100% perfect until you actually have those tracking points realized.
Right. So I think the first person to actually come up with like, you know, middleware, like you say, that works like 99%. Well, then I think, you know, potentially we could see that like in a bunch of different games. That'd be great.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I think avatar embodiment's a big part of VR in the future. Being able to actually have your entire body present and have all the body language and the social engagement in that way. Whether you're playing a game or just socializing in a space or whatever the app is, it's certainly very compelling.
So in the experience that I played, there wasn't, you guys didn't have voice chat enabled. I assume that in the final game there will be, and also, is it going to be directional? Is the audio going to be directional once you guys have?
Oh, absolutely. So in other builds, we do have voice chat enabled. We just recently switched over to the Steam voice chat, and we're experimenting with that now to get that integrated. So unfortunately, today we don't have the voice chat enabled on these demo stations. But in the full experience, absolutely, you can actually speak into your mic. It's all positionalized using positional audio algorithms, so you will hear the person's voice as if they're there with you in the space. It's not just an overarching layer that plays over everything. And at the same time, we're actually tracking your voice patterns and your speech and detecting your phonemes. We call it phoneme detection. That is what allows us to animate the avatar's face dynamically to simulate what the user's actual mouth and facial expression might be at the time.
Gotcha. And maybe this is more of a question for the VR headset guys, but now that I have you here, like, is there, you know, so the Rift, I mean, you guys are working on the Vive, but the Rift comes with integrated audio or like a audio headset thing.
It does.
The Vive doesn't. Does that make it any harder to program for audio or anything like that?
I don't think it affects audio software at all.
Okay.
I think it's really just I mean, you obviously want to have a target headset you're aiming for that you can
Right, and you don't really have that with the Vive because everybody's going to be bringing their own, right?
Well, you kind of take the same tactic that most game developers do, which is like, okay, we're making a game for PC. What does our target audience generally use, and what data could we have to support certain choices around what target hardware we're going for, and then you just kind of build out from there. So you choose a target headset that you'd like, audio headset or a group of headsets you'd like to make sure it works really well on, because you're guaranteed most of your audience will be using something along those lines. And that problem is greatly simplified when you have integrated hardware. So the Oculus solution is actually very, very promising, extremely compelling in my opinion.
Okay, but you're saying it's not a knock against the Vive.
Not at all.
Okay.
No, I wouldn't say it's a blocker at all. I mean, again, it comes down to user preference. Would you rather have a simpler user experience with less setup and integrated audio, or would you rather have a more choice and be able to integrate your existing audio headphones? It's really just depends on who the customer is. And if you look at who the customers are, the Vive customer is very much a hardcore PC user. They're Steam users, really. It's likely that most Steam users have headsets already, and they already have their own audio headphones they prefer. The Oculus customer is a little bit different. You know, they have the entire Gear VR side of their customer base, which is mobile focused and a bit more casual, and they have the PC customer base as well. But I'm noticing that it's not as hardcore as the typical Steam user. It's a broader form of content, and it's more casual, and those users might actually appreciate having audio already solved for them.
Gotcha. And going back to the game, and the final question, price and release date for raw data?
We aren't announcing any release dates or pricing yet, but we will be going into early access very soon on Vive, and we'll be releasing a version 1 of the product soon thereafter.
Cool. Thank you, James.
Yeah, thanks so much.